Now that we've taken the cattle grid out from further down, which used to mark the boundary of the 550 hectare grazing unit, we're now extending this to 1,370 hectares in partnership with National Trust and RSPB, which means that the animals are going to be grazing over a much wider area. And because they're grazing over that much wider area, it allows us to be more dynamic in terms of the processes and the habitats that we're creating. And that means that we can move away from this idea of having a mosaic habitat where it's really diverse and vegetation structures very static, and moving into something that's a bit more like a kaleidoscope. So you're really getting all of that shifting, that changing habitats, things are coming, things are going. And if we lose something in one area, it's okay, because it'll probably turn up somewhere else now that we've got these processes back in, and we know that we can be looking after the species specifically and focusing our efforts on those. So the grazing is really important for managing heathlands. One of the biggest problems we have is the succession, particularly in areas like this where we have the bigger mires. We want to try and keep those mires in a peak forming community, so we want to keep it as open sphagnum. It can be quite difficult to get into mires and do the management works because of those saturated ground conditions, and using livestock, using natural processes completely removes that entire element and the difficulty of doing so. So in traditional farming systems, we don't often get the full herd dynamics because cows are kept apart from the bulls. This means that you don't get a lot of that competition, and without the competition, you don't get things like bull pits, which is what we're starting to see here. So the sort of first thing they do is they come in and they'll dung immediately, and then that's sort of bringing all that seed source in of all these pioneer plants that's starting to actually seed in to the bank of the bare ground, because it's those perfect conditions for those really pioneer stages. Here, you know, with the sort of the clay sand mix of this soil, where you've got those sort of steeper pit walls as well, that's really valuable for a lot of invertebrates and can really heat up in the summer.
There's full of deer footprints here, so I'm guessing that sika stags may be coming in and using the same pits, so sharing the same scrapes for their own displaying.
Yeah, and that's fantastic for the invertebrates as well. You kind of think that the dynamic system might actually, you know, make it really difficult for those species to actually survive, because there's constant disturbance and the bulls are coming back in, the deer are coming in to break it up. Some places we've got their horses on in the same place and they'll come in and start scraping away at it as well, looking for roots and things like that. But actually it's protective of them, because a lot of them, things like the Purbeck mason moss, you know, these parasitic species that we have that will prey on things like the mining bees. And actually, you know, what they found in Europe, where they're a bit further ahead than us, I think they've got a bit more in terms of bull pits and dynamic processes. They're finding that actually those invertebrates are putting their chambers in much deeper to protect themselves from that process, because in some places, you know, they've got bull pits that are growing by sort of 1 to 2 meters in a year. So that's a lot of ground shifting.
Yes.
But actually, when those secondary species come in, like the deer that we've had here, and they start scraping away little bits of it, and they're not quite as extensive in the way that they excavate it, and that's actually then covering up the burrow entrance.
Yeah.
So it's sealing the chamber and protecting them from the parasitic species. Yeah. So they're actually having really good breeding success despite the dynamic processes, which is really interesting. And it's, you know, it's something that, with your help, we're helping to discover in the UK, which is something I think is kind of cutting edge, actually.
Well, that's great, isn't it?
It's fantastic.